Hello and welcome to the 20th Last Edit podcast. I know, 20 times. I implore you, go back, check out the other films we've covered. There might be something that you haven't seen or that you're really into, but here we are, 20. So, this is a weekly film podcast with my amazing friend
Silver Hawkins.
and myself, Citizen Sleeve, and we each choose a different film in opposing weeks and then we discuss it for our podcast. Now, this week was my choice, and I chose a film which is, it makes me incredible. It destroys me emotionally, quite frankly. It's Roland Joffé's 1984 film, The Killing Fields, starring Sam Waterston as, well, Sidney Schumann, a New York journalist who is friends with Dith Pran, played by Haing S, who won the Oscar in 1985 for Best Supporting Actor for this film. And they are journalists in Cambodia. Dith Pran is Cambodian, who are trying to cover the war. And it's a heart-wrenching film. The performances are amazing. Some of the cinematography is fantastic. There are moments which are incredibly harrowing and horrific and will sear into your mind and they will never leave you. And it's a film that has so much to say about a war that wasn't really covered in anywhere near the same capacity as, say, Vietnam. You know, there are plenty of Vietnam War films about the realities of that war. But the Cambodian War is just as important and just as horrific for humanity to face. So, it's a film I've seen periodically throughout my life. It's a film I always go back to. It's a film that kind of... It's not a film to watch on a happy-go-lucky weekend with friends if you want a jolly good romp. It's a film which says a lot. And it's a film which, as we discussed before with Miller's Crossing, it's not a film you can really look away from because there is so much going on.
Yeah.
The action, the motion of the film is almost constantly driving forward through the horrors of the situation that Cambodia finds itself in. So, in essence, and really quickly, Cambodia War is taking place between the Cambodian armies, the government, and what's known as the Khmer Rouge. But also at the time, the Americans are getting involved. And during this conflict, they secretly, this is Ford initially and then Nixon as president, they bomb Cambodia.
Well, no, Ford was after Nixon.
Ford was after. And then they bomb Cambodia and then they send troops in. Both without the Cambodians ever being informed.
Yeah, they drop, not only do they drop bombs on Cambodia, they drop 500,000 ton, like 500,000 tons of bombs, I think.
Yeah, $7 million worth or something, I think.
Yeah, and they kill like 300,000 people.
Yeah, like genocide. I mean, you know, it's beyond fathomable.
Which helped cement like sympathy for the Khmer Rouge, obviously.
Yeah, and that's where the film takes a huge turn for even worse things. But we'll come to that. Okay, so what did you think of Killing Fields? Had you seen it before? I assume you had, and you know, what do you think of it now?
I had seen it before, but I don't think I'd really been able back then to give it sort of the attention it needs. Like I think it was a fairly shallow viewing I had of it back then, like 20 years ago or something. It's sadly not. I mean, this is precisely the kind of film that I wanted to take part in this podcast for in order to highlight, because this is not really a film that gets televised a lot. It's not a film that gets circulated. It's practically impossible to even find DVD or Blu-ray copies of it. Like, at least for me, I've tried, but I haven't been able to really turn up anything on it.
I think it's only easily accessible in the UK on Amazon, for instance, to rent, because it's primarily a British film. Yeah. That's what it was seen as at the time, and produced by Putnam. So that's probably one of the only reasons I could see it so easily.
Yeah, and I mean it's sad that access to it is so restricted, because this is a masterpiece. I mean, in terms of like a viewing experience, it is most comparable to Schindler's List. Like we talked about before we started the podcast, it starts off like a little slowly, but then it picks up, and from there it is just relentless, and it's nearly relentless misery outside of maybe like two places, which is John Malkovich telling a joke, and the whole process where they try and sort of falsify a passport for pawn. and outside of that, it's pretty much just constant misery.
Yeah, it really is.
Constant human misery, and it's really engaging. It's portrayed in a sort of documentary-like style that is, I think, that is owed to sort of the lens through which we experience the film, which is through journalists. Like Sam Waterston's character, Sydney, is a correspondent for the New York Times, and Pran is his basically local interpreter, logistics guy. He's the guy who's responsible for sort of making sure that Sydney can get through to the various places in the country to report from these places and so forth. I think if I have a fault to the film initially, it is that it sort of just drops you into the film without a whole lot of context to the conflict that's going on and the situation in Cambodia at the time, which you just sketched. It's something that, I mean, that context mostly comes up later in a scene where Sydney is back in New York and is watching like old tapes of Nixon and news reports and so forth, while on the soundtrack they play Nisun Dorma, sung by Pavarotti, which is a really sort of discordant song to the imagery that
very much so.
that they show in that sequence. But yeah, I would have liked maybe like a text blurb or something explaining context a bit deeper, but just to people who aren't aware of this.
It's odd that you actually get that after the film. You know, that kind of repositions what's happened since the film has ended, but you don't get that at the start. But yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Especially because, like you say, it is tremendously important. I mean, it's not American involvement in Cambodia was mostly covert. And it's important to realize that after this movie and after Pol Pot was actually kicked out of Cambodia by the Vietnamese, American and British governments continued to support Pol Pot with arms, with logistics, and with money, so that he could fight the Vietnamese, and so that he could retain an armed insurgency in Cambodia. And that continued up through basically the 90s. But yeah, it's a really tough film to kind of review, because it's less of a film than it is an experience. There are so many standout moments in the film, especially in terms of building suspense. Like, one of the most suspenseful moments I've ever seen in a film is when, after they go back to the hospital, and they're on their way out, away from the hospital, and they get captured by the Khmer Rouge. And they get lined up along with a lot of other people, and many of these people are then subsequently just summarily shot and executed. And it's pretty clear that the intention of the Khmer Rouge is to shoot and execute Sydney and the other Western reporters. And then Dith Pran starts negotiating with them. And there's this suspense where they constantly sort of cut between them. And there's this suspense building of, will they survive or won't they? And seems the very real possibility that they won't, until Dith Pran is eventually able to negotiate for their lives for 2 cases of Coca-Colas. And that whole sequence, the way it's shot, the way it's set up, is just masterful.
It is, and I think that's the word to use throughout a lot of this, the whole film, the sequences in the film. I mean, that point at which they've just seen the kid being operated on in the hospital, and they know there's not enough blood, and there are moments that happen throughout this film.
Yeah, and that scene as well, where they go into the hospital and the walls are covered with blood, like pasted with it
everywhere.
And then there's this deep-seated irony of the surgeon who's with the kid, operating on the kid, and he's missing plasma, even though the walls are soaked in blood.
No, they know where it is, they just can't get to it. But this, you know, when they come out and the Khmer Rouge surround them and capture them, the height of the escalation is so high. The Khmer Rouge are screaming. The cuts are fast. Dith Pran is praying in front of them, trying to get them to listen, to release his friends, even to get into the tank to be with them initially. He has to give them
his watch.
Got. And slowly but surely, the tension is just ever so slightly diffused, and you can tell by Pran's speech and the way he's calmed down, and the soldiers have slightly calmed down around him, but the tension is so high at that point. And the scene you mentioned before, when I guess we'll get there actually. So yeah, they're captured, and eventually they're allowed their cameras and stuff back, but it's frightening just how easy it is for the Khmer Rouge to take people from the streets and just execute them without any second thought.
And not maybe not even take them from the street, just shoot them there on the spot.
Shoot them on the street. Yeah, exactly. There's no thought. And the more frightening thing is that a lot of this is done by child soldiers. And a lot of the reasoning for that we'll come to later in the film. But a lot of these executions, a lot of almost the leaders within the Khmer Rouge at the time were kids, teenagers who'd been indoctrinated in this way of thinking, and almost their first thought was, if you do not exactly fit what you should fit in our thought process, then you're dead, you're gone.
I mean, it's important to sort of underline that the Khmer Rouge, once they got into power, one of the things they sort of set out to do was they wanted a Cambodian super race, similar to Nazi ideology, where they started similar to like John Crow race laws and the Nuremberg laws in Germany. They started to sort of segment the population into different racial groups. So you had like a primary, you were a first citizen, you were a full citizen, you were a half citizen, or you were a non-citizen. And you have different rights depending on which of these citizen groups you sort of fell into in terms of your ethnicity. And yeah, I mean, that was sort of the core of their agenda.
That ideology is so prevalent throughout the film, especially as we come to the second stage. But prior to that, I mean, as we said, it starts off a little bit slow, although the cinematography of the opening shots and the red
throughout.
The red titling just of the killing fields is so prominent and overt. And those shots leading up to finally, because of course Pran goes to the hospital, he misses Sid when he first arrives, and they know each other a bit because they've worked a bit before. But that whole relationship and the way they play off one another and the way they're so protective of one another all the way through the film. There's little changes throughout, but I mean, one of the first big moments is Sid goes to see one of the majors, Major Reeves, I think, played by Craig T. Nelson.
Yeah.
And he wants
military attaché, American military attaché.
His flight was delayed and something has gone down, something has happened. He's heard that bombs have been dropped, that people have been killed. And this is the first secret thing that happens that the Cambodians aren't warned of by the Americans. And he just won't tell him anything. But he knows the truth. And he and Dith Pran find a way to get to the area in which the bombs were dropped. Via payments and via boat. And what they see when they get there is heartbreaking. This whole city has been decimated by these bombs. There are bodies everywhere. There are screaming parents looking for their children. There's one moment when they crouch for a minute and a little boy grabs Sid's face and starts playing with it and smiling. And that kind of juxtaposition of the innocence of children up against this backdrop of just bloody carnage everywhere. Yeah. The injured, the wounded, the dead, the screams, the shouting that's going on. And those moments throughout the film, they're always incredibly difficult to watch, but they're so engaging because of the humanity within some of the situations that you see. Not always, certainly.
Yes.
But some of those situations.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
And the pace really, it never lets up, as you said. There's moments where there's lulls. Just little moments here and there.
Yeah, but they're few and far between.
They really are. And that, again, is the chaos of war, and that's what this film is trying to show you. Nothing ever stops. However horrific things get, these people have to move forward. So then, things just get worse and worse and worse. So the Khmer Rouge are becoming stronger and stronger. The government is starting to be overthrown. The moment which you mentioned where they're in the car and the tank comes is really when we first properly see the Khmer Rouge, and then seeing them everywhere.
I think it's worth there is a moment before then, even where
there's two soldiers that are captured in that scene I talked about.
Where Waterston is captured and Pran are captured by the government forces when they go.
Held. They
go to inspect that bombing site. And Waterston is still sort of really cavalier
Yeah.
and really sort of arrogant. He doesn't quite get the magnitude of seriousness of the predicament that he's in, and he's
Yeah.
sort of insistent. No, I can just go take a leak or whatever. Like, even though
I want a cigarette.
I'm under
Yeah.
I'm under captivity here. And he just leaves basically, and then all of a sudden he gets a rifle pointed at him, with the safety
Reality
off.
kicks in.
With the safety off, yeah. And that's really sort of the first moment where he realizes, oh, wait a minute, I don't quite have my privilege anymore. Of sort of being on the outside. All of a sudden, this got very, 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 very real, very, very quickly. That's sort of
In fact,
the first.
the only time
really
it changes
sort
is the
of poignant-
helicopters.
Yeah,
When they come in and he hears them, and because they're both asleep and they wake up, and the helicopters come in, and he realizes it's the U.S. Army's brought in the press corps.
yeah,
Which is what he wanted in the first place. He just had to circumvent that because he got no information. And then he is back to kind of his bullshit, get me out of here, I've got rights, and I'm American kind of self. But up until that point, yeah, you're right. It's one of the first moments when I think he realizes, I could die here. So
Yeah.
maybe shut your mouth, you know? The moment that really gets me, there's bits later on, but the first moment that really gets me is the passport photo.
yeah,
So at this point, Cambodia is screwed. The civil war is happening. The overthrowing of the original government is happening.
Well, it's effectively kind of over because by this point the Khmer Rouge is marching into the capital.
And marching into the capital, but you get that almost fake sense of, oh, it's okay, just for a minute as well, because the Cambodian army are marching.
At first, the Khmer Rouge get greeted as liberators, and even Pran is greeting
Out
them
in the
as
streets.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, finally, the civil war is over. Finally, we
No more
can have
fighting,
peace.
yeah.
We can have peace. And of course, the reality turns out to be much, much different.
Well, fascist dictatorship taking over the country.
Yeah.
And so then we have this just, it's one of the most tense scenes in film for me. So the embassy's starting to close. The American embassy is closed. They find their way. They've heard from the British embassy. Julian Sand's character Swain tells Sid that the French embassy might be the best place to go. So they end up in the French embassy, and the Khmer Rouge want every Cambodian out. They want to take them because they want to get them to where they want to get them. There's slave camps out to certain parts of the country.
Yeah, and they have a plan.
indoctrinate
They
them.
have a plan to evacuate every single city. Which is quite ambitious.
Incredibly
especially
ambitious.
with the capital.
Yeah, absolutely. And they come up with this plan where they're going to take a passport, they're going to alter it a bit, they're going to take a photo of Dith Pran, and they're going to put it in there, and they're going to fake it, and he's going to get out with them. Oh man, the whole scene is constructed so... It just tenseness of the expectation, as with most Hollywood films that to do with war, that this scene comes out well.
Yeah.
That this scene works. It doesn't. Malkovich and Alan Swain, are in the small dark room they found with a passport, with really bad paper and liquids, trying to get a photo that fixes properly so they can put it in the passport. And then Al thinks he's done it. He gets it in a passport. It's held for a while. Now they're all being asked by the French to give them their passports, all the journalists, so they're all passing them over, and Pran's kind of clinging onto his because he's still worried, he's still unsure. Sid comes over and takes it from him, puts both on the desk, and then later, unfortunately, Swain initially finds out that the photo has
It's
not
gone
fixed,
foggy. Yeah.
and it's gone, and that is heartbreaking. Because the speed of the scenes, the speed of that sequence, they're all manically trying to do everything they can to help Pran, but in the end, it's futile.
Yeah, I mean, it's also worth noting that at this point, Pran has managed to evacuate his family.
Yes, he has. Yeah,
So it's just
And,
him left.
not gone
basically.
himself.
Yeah, he's chosen to stay with Sydney, Sam Waterston's character.
Yeah, exactly. And but the thing with that scene as well, that's slightly heartbreaking because you see him start to cry when he's asked that question by Sydney, and he says, "I'm a journalist too. I'm a reporter too. It's what I do, Cambodia or otherwise." But that's at the point where the film really changes. So the Americans, the journalists, the British journalists, etc., all evacuated. French journalists. They go back to New York. He becomes Journalist of the Year, and the film slows down a bit, and we see him dealing with trying to find out where Pran is, sending to different embassies his photo and letters to the Red Cross, to all these different organisations, and getting awards and stuff. And now and again we come back to his search for Dith Pran. But one of the most poignant parts of the film is the final third, when Dith Pran has now been captured by the Khmer Rouge and is basically a slave in their fields initially.
I think what you sort of touched on it here, but I think to me what the film's greatest achievement is, to me, sort of, is that it completely avoids the white savior trope that would have been here in pretty much any other film of this type, or by any other sort of director, where Sam Waterston's character would have sort of kind of swept into Cambodia and gotten Pran out somehow.
Yeah.
But here he's just rendered completely impotent. There's nothing he can do. And I think and that impotence is extremely poignant and powerful. Much more so than any satisfaction that would have been garnered by him sort of sweeping in and saving the day.
Well, it's the true stark horror of war and the chaos of war. It's not this neat fix. It's not the Hollywood equilibrium system.
It's not even... I mean, I don't think it's even war, because I don't think this is particularly a war film. It's deeper than that. Like, it doesn't really portray war as such. It portrays ethnic conflict, certainly. But I don't consider it a war film as such. I think it's more complicated than that. It's more of a...
politics, themes of
politics, absolutely.
Humanity and what is humanity?
Yes,
how do you define
absolutely.
it? Empathy, humans having empathy and not having empathy, the indoctrination of children, and you're right. It's not just as simple as the conflict of two sides.
Yeah, I mean there's one kind of battle scene where the Khmer Rouge are storming a government position. And where you see a kid basically sort of shutting their eyes and screaming. While all the noise is going on, like machine gun fire and bullets are flying everywhere, mortar fire. That's sort of the only real kind of battle scene I remember from the film anyway, that sort of sticks out in my mind. But
yeah, it's much more about human cost.
Yes.
And survival.
Yes,
I mean,
and just the casual, again, like we talked about in Paths of Glory, sort of the casual disregard for human life.
Yeah, as if it means
complete
nothing,
dismissal.
It costs nothing.
Yes.
Yeah. And no more do we see that when he's fully captured by the Khmer Rouge and the conditions that he and the fellow Cambodians are under. Initially, we see them in the fields, we see them scooping up clay, we see them under really harsh work conditions. He tries to grow tomato plants at one point, and then the indoctrinated kids are led by the leaders to rip up all the natural food they're trying to grow.
I mean,
he does his...
I mean, the big thing from Pol Pot was when he was out sort of in the mountains, helping to lead insurgencies. He came across these little isolated tribal rural communities that were self-sufficient. Like basically they grew their own food, they operated independently. And he sort of saw something admirable in that, and he wanted to sort of expand that to the entire country and make the entire country self-sufficient. So no import, no anything, no import of medicine either.
Pure Cambodian, no outside influence of any kind.
Absolutely. That was sort of the big thing. And unfortunately proved to have predictably disastrous consequences.
Yeah, hugely disastrous. I mean, some of the things you see in the film, especially with children, there are moments. We get past the kind of the work stuff, but then we get to a point where we see Dith Pran in these little shack temples or huts almost, where the leader of the Khmer Rouge, or one of the leaders, is talking to all these children and spouting this ideological state that they should adopt.
We are now in year 0. The revolution has begun. We're creating a new society. We are starting over. The pasts of the sins of the past are okay so long as you confess. And a number of people then come forward to sort of confess that they had associations with Westerners or whatever. They learned French or English or whatever. But then subsequently, after they've confessed, these people then go missing and are never heard from
disappear.
Again.
Yeah. There's that really heartbreaking bit where there's the lesson going on, and Dith Pran is just over the way looking in, and a kid is called up and stands up and walks to a board and crosses out a family and
Yeah,
separates the children from them.
there's an illustration on the blackboard
Yeah.
of like three kids holding the hands of their parents. And then the kid goes over and washes out the hand held between the child and the parent, because you must have love for nothing other than the state.
Yeah, absolutely. I've said the word before, but that's what's frightening about this kind of stuff.
Yeah,
This is biographical. This isn't some fantastical, imaginative, piece of war that's created for cinema. This is a thing that happened, and this film is one of the most truthful and honest depictions of war I think I've ever seen. I mean, the bits towards the end when Dith Pran has tried to escape a number of times. One of the first.
I mean,
things
there is a scene in the work that I think we should highlight when they're in the forced labor, where Pran is out working the rice fields, and there's a little girl. She's, I think, maybe 12 or 13 or something, and she sort of goes around and inspects the different workers, and she stops at one of the workers and she inspects his hands to see does it have calluses or something that indicates the extent of his labor, and somehow he fails her test, and so she just drags him off, and they bring him down to his knees, put a bag over his head, and basically let him suffocate to get to death, because they're not going to waste bullets on him. And that's a really poignant and sort of disturbing scene at the level of just disconnect that's occurred for these kids. Where human life has
they're completely
so
brainwashed.
Value.
Yeah, exactly. So little value. And they're kids, and
Pran is sort of captured and tied to a post or a tree
after having all the hell beaten out of him by canes.
Yeah, and they leave him there, and then one of the other kids comes up, and it's a kid he interacted with earlier in the film and gave like a Mercedes hood ornament to. And the kid remembers the Mercedes hood ornament and then cuts the rope and frees Pran and leaves him to sort of try and make his escape. And then we sort of see these sort of horror landscapes that he crosses, some of which are sort of meticulous recreations of actual photos from the killing fields of Cambodia, where especially the one like by the river of just all the skeletal bones and human remains that are just like staggering in their scale.
Oh, and the way he, I mean that whole sequence where he's on that slim bit of mud, with the river either side, with dead bodies and bones, and just the horror when he falls into a pit, and it's not that he doesn't know it's there, but now he has to touch them, and it's even more real. But the fact that he gets up and carries on and pushes through this torment is just, I mean, a lot of people talk about films like Shawshank Redemption, and you get that the hopeful end and the stuff he has to go through to get out. This is, I mean, so much beyond that. If you could imagine what horrors a single human being has to get to escape the place they're in, this is about as
and I
worse.
mean, with this film, it's made even more so because of the context of the film itself. Because the film's actor, Haing, was a survivor of the killing fields. Yeah, he was an intellectual. He was a doctor, and like Pran in the film, he had to play stupid. He had to pretend, no, I don't know anything. I'm just a stupid peasant. La-di-da. And in order to survive, like a lot of the stuff that Pran goes through in the film, you would imagine Haing has seen
firsthand,
gone through himself, and that even this particular role must have been like going through all of the worst experiences of his life all over again,
all at once. Yeah, completely. And then he passes out from exhaustion, and he's spotted by more Khmer Rouge who pick him up, and he's captured again. And he lives in this little house with this chief within the Khmer Rouge who is constantly trying to get him to
because
speak English or speak French.
He sees right through him. He sees
absolutely.
There's more to you, Prawn, than you're letting on. You're
but Prawn is scared
you're not just
because
a stupid present.
Well, he thinks it's a nefarious reasoning that this guy wants to know for obvious reasons.
Well, he doesn't know. I mean, he can't trust him.
Exactly.
That's why he can't. He doesn't know specifically that there's nefarious intent, but he can't trust him because if he opens himself up, he's liable to just get shot on the spot.
Yeah, executed again. I mean, and he shows great love for this chief's son.
Yeah,
there's some really nice moments. The way he looks after him,
sings a lullaby and stuff.
Sings a lullaby and nurtures the boy, and eventually, he speaks English to Dith Pran and tells him that he doesn't.
Well, they catch Pran tries to sneak off during the night and listen to a radio broadcast. Yeah. And that's when they catch him because he's listening to radio broadcasts in English, and at that point,
at that point
you're caught red-handed. Yeah.
But he puts his trust in him and he says, "Look, you need to protect my son because I'm going to say some stuff, and they don't really like me already, and I don't like them, and something might happen." So he slips him a map and some money for later use, so he kind of knows where he's going and what he's doing, and then. There's a scene where
because they're summarily executing people just outside.
Yeah, and there's a scene he's looking out the window, and there's a little girl who is executed, and that's the moment when he decides he has to do something. And when he goes outside, Dith Pran is now taking the child, and they're trying to hide as best as they can. He goes outside, he's killed by another Khmer Rouge leader, as if it was nothing.
Yeah, there's barely any acknowledgement of it at all. He just gets shot and everyone just...
I don't even think he looks at him. I think he just... And then carries on walking.
Yeah,
it's horrifying. So then we get to the final stage of the film, where Pran is trying to protect this kid, is trying to take another few people with him from the village, and just trying to protect themselves, hide when they can, move when they can, and avoid at all costs the Khmer Rouge.
And try and make for the border.
Try and make for the border. And there's a point at which the group split because there's an old man who's quite ill. He's been carried by one set. They're in the jungle. The Khmer Rouge are there. They're hiding. They're being chased. And excuse me. We come to a little section where they've avoided most people, and all of a sudden, the boy who's been carried by another Cambodian behind Pran steps on a landmine.
Yeah.
And panic sets in. The guy doesn't know what to do, and Pran is like, calm, pass me the kid, and the mine goes off, and the kid dies, and so does the guy. And again, unlike...
Well, I don't even think the kid dies then and there, because Pran does pick him up, and then...
He picks him up, but I'm not sure whether the body's already dead.
Yeah, I mean, that is open to interpretation. I mean, my reading was that the boy was possibly alive when he picked him up, and then died on the way.
It certainly could be that. Yeah, and I think that's it, isn't it? That's, again, it's so anti what you'd expect to see in any typical Hollywood war film.
Yes, and it just happens like that. Boom. There's nothing else.
There's no inkling. There's no setup. As a normal viewer of movies,
the music does sort of swell up enormously at that point.
Yeah,
and might be the only clue as to that something's going to happen.
But it's so quick as well. I mean, as you said, it's not just. There's no build up. There's no sense of this child's going to die. It just happens, and it's just like a smack in the face, another smack in the face.
Yeah.
As a viewer watching these atrocities.
And another reminder of your complete and total impotence.
Yeah.
You have no power. You have no strength. You have absolutely nothing you can do makes any difference. Which is really disillusioning and sort of, yeah.
Yeah. So then, Pran just keeps going. He just keeps going. He just keeps going. He just keeps going. And eventually, he looks over the peak of a hill and he sees the Red Cross. And he knows that he's safe. And at that point, the music kicks in a bit more. And I think...
Yeah, at that point, that I actually found effective when the music kicked in there.
Yeah.
And got really sort of... Because the other points where the music had gotten a little obvious... it did feel like it sometimes called a little too much attention to itself and distracted from the scene itself.
It did, and we talked prior to the podcast about some, like, I adore this film, but there are some moments where the music doesn't really work. There's obviously the more overt uses to support the emotional base that's happening in the scene, which is too much sometimes. but also there's some incredibly discordant, chaotic industrial music that happens when the US Army are coming in and things like that happening, and I can understand why, but again, it's like it has to be too obvious to support the theme on screen when I don't think it needed to be, because this film is so subtle at times.
Yeah, it is.
You know, it doesn't
It
quite
does.
need that sound.
It does so much with so very little.
It does, performance-wise. I mean, so the British Cross then. So, and at this point, I don't know how you feel, but for me, that was when I know I've seen this plenty of times before, but it's always at the point in the film when I go, because there's a slight sense of relief, and there's been almost no relief at all throughout
Precisely
the entire
because
film.
it's been so relentless. So you're finally out through, like Prawn. You're finally through to the other side.
Exactly. So finally, because Sid has sent out all these letters and photographs to the Red Cross, obviously to all these different organisations, he gets word that Prawn is alive, and we see this in New York, and he scrambles about telling people and tries to get out there. And the very final scene is both beautiful and has one major issue. The beauty of it is the relief that this guy who's been searching for Prawn for so long, and Prawn, who just wanted to see and help his friend, finally see each other. Prawn is called out by someone. He doesn't really know what's going on. He's like, someone's here for you, and he walks out.
And Americans here, yeah.
And just to say this as well, after all Prawn has been through, the last thing we see him do, apart from this very end sequence, he's with the Red Cross and he's helping an amputee. It's the kindness of the man, given the circumstances and given what he's been through.
Yeah, and not only that, but when they embrace and Sydney asks him, "Can you forgive me, Prawn? Can you forgive me for leaving you and for not getting you out?" And Prawn answers, "Well, there's nothing to forgive you."
Yeah, it's honestly, I think, one of the most beautiful endings to a film I've ever seen.
I agree. It's only spoiled
gets me
somewhat by the John Lennon Imagine song, which is in the background, which is a little too obvious for me.
It is,
for that, where it didn't need it, because that moment is so satisfying and so effective.
Exactly.
in
you
conveying
don't need
its
that
humanity
audible reinforcement
all on its own.
Yeah, you don't need the audible reinforcement all the time, and that's really my only criticism of the film. I mean,
yes,
it's beautifully shot. The cinematography is gorgeous at times. The pacing is relentless, as war should be. It never
performances
cops out.
are impeccable.
Yeah, this film never cops out at any point. At any point where the film could easily tie its little bow and give us something happy, it doesn't, because that's not what war is. It unfurls everything in front of us and shows us the realities of true horror committed by people, and the true horror and the cost of human life, and the ways in which some people have to deal with it. My only gripe would be some musical issues here and there, but oh man, again, there's 2, 3, 4 times in this film, doesn't matter how many times I watch it, I just choke up. Because it's so affecting.
I think this is a seminal film, and it's a film that's even more important in today's environment. I mean, watching it, one of the things that kind of brought me a bit to tears was I watched recently, Donald Trump gave a speech to, I think it was like the Republican Jewish convention or something, where he was ridiculing asylum seekers, and even taking in the very notion of taking in asylum seekers and refugees, and the entire room was laughing. Yeah,
as if it's this horribly bad thing.
Not only that, but the entire room of Jews. It was a Jewish assembly he was talking to, and let's not forget that a lot of Jews who tried to flee Nazi Germany were turned away. They were told, "No, we don't have room for you. No, we don't really believe you're in danger. You're a wealthy German surgeon or whatever. Yeah, you'll be fine." Yeah,
it's these despicable repeated patterns in history.
Yes,
and that's what this is yet again. Yeah, and it's so prevalent now that it could have been made now. I mean, it's a film that, as you said, it's not a war film. It's a drama that takes place in war, but it's real. And because it's real,
it's about the devaluation of human life. Fundamentally, it's about what happens whenever we decide that there's an other or something that needs to be purged, that there are undesirables.
Yeah.
Whether these people are Jews, whether they are other ethnicities that don't fit in with whatever image we want.
Exactly. Religious groups, whether it's a different culture, whether it's just, well, in this case, Cambodians. I mean, it's a film I think you should all see. If anyone out there has not seen this film, it's one of the most important.
It can. I mean, unfortunately, it can be really difficult to track down.
Yeah.
I mean, I managed to find a copy that's not entirely legal. Unfortunately, I would imagine it's not entirely legal. That I could watch online, but that was the only outlet I had for it. I would happily buy this film, but I can't find it on the market.
Tell you where you might be able to get it. I've just thought, and it won't be on there yet, but it's the kind of thing they'd certainly add. Because, I mean, again, UK, easy for me to find on Amazon. It might even be relatively okay to find in America, but there's going to be pockets around the world you can't find it. But the Criterion Collection streaming service, it's exactly the kind of film that they would probably have on that service. So I'd keep an eye on that streaming service, because they take these kind of films and not a lot of other different companies tend to. Their collection is not just obscure films, important films that maybe have vanished in the passages of time, those kind of things. So yeah, keep an eye on the Criterion Collection for those type of films, I would.
Yeah.
Okay, well, just watch this film if you can. It's an incredibly important film. It's an incredibly prevalent film, and it talks about humanity like very few others do. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't, like you say, it doesn't compromise. It doesn't take the easy way out. It doesn't pander to the whole like white savior trope that we see so often, where it takes the Westerner or whatever to sort of save the people in danger. Here, Pran has to save himself.
And he's the only one who can in the end, because nothing else works. And that's often the way of the world and the way of horrific events like this.
I mean, that's also historically, what happened with Pran. There was nothing Sydney could do to get him out. He could only hope for the best. He'd basically given Pran up for dead towards the end. Until
there's that scene in the bathroom with Malkovich, isn't there, where Malkovich is really angry. He's at the award show, and Malkovich is really angry with Al's character, and starts saying, "Look, you didn't do enough. You didn't do enough to bring him home. You didn't doing enough." And he says, "I'm doing everything I can. They won't let me back in. They won't let me fly. I've sent letters and called every single agency on earth that I can think of that can help." And yeah, he's almost given up by then. But
yeah, and I think, I mean, that's also, I think, in part by Malkovich's character, by his own guilt.
Oh yeah.
That that Sydney sort of becomes a convenient scapegoat for him to sort of allay his own responsibility in that whole situation onto.
Especially the photograph not working. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Right, go watch it. Go watch Killing Fields. Roland Joffé, 1984. It's a sublime masterpiece in the true horror of war.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we should call out Haing's performance, because Haing was not a trained actor. He was basically just he's a doctor, a pediatrician, a Cambodian refugee that came to America, and then was discovered and cast in this role, and he's sublime in it.
And won an Oscar.
He has this really performances. Has this earnest sincerity that really shines throughout the entire film, and this sort of
the unwavering truthfulness.
Yeah, and optimism that sort of carries through, even through the most harrowing ordeals. Yeah. Don't know what else to say. Please watch this film if you can. There are many films we watch that we admire, and this is one that deserves your admiration and your. Absolutely, it does.
Right, next week, Silver. What do you have for us?
It's going to be another sort of somewhat older film from 1973. It's going to be Fred Zinnemann's Day of the Jackal, which is, I think, one of the most seminal films in terms of building suspense, like slow burn thriller. It's a film that I return to every now and then and has held up throughout the years for me. It will be interesting to see if it still does. I suspect it does. But yeah, I really enjoy that film as just on a technical level in terms of its craftsmanship and just the way it builds suspense, I think, and the way it sort of portrays police investigative work is really compelling.
probably a film I haven't seen for 15 years. I would say not quite as bad as some of the films we've seen, of course, or rewatched, but certainly a film I haven't seen for a long time. Right, well, thank you very much for watching as ever. Talk to us in the comments about Killing Field, about how did it affect you, about parts of the film that really kind of shocked you and blindsided you, and what you thought about. Did you even know about the Cambodian conflict prior to this film?
I have to admit my own knowledge on the conflict is somewhat superficial. I haven't really read.
No, exactly.
I haven't really
most
read,
of mine came from this film.
In depth about it. Only like tangential articles here and there. In sort of remembrance of anniversaries as they came up. But yeah, I mean, it's over 2 million people died in this genocide. And if you go look up the images from it, it's it's beyond
haunting.
harrowing. It's straight out of the Holocaust or worse.
Incredibly not good. Right, somber end, but we're never that somber for long. Thank you for watching the Last Edit podcast. Come and watch us next week. We'll be about We Love That Obscure Film Thing. I have been Citizen Sleeve.
And I've been Silver Hawkins.
Take it easy, folks. Have a good week.
Take care.